heard back from him yet, but hopefully we'll hear soon. With that, I'm going to introduce Colonel Jim Evans.
Can we kill that light so we can see that? Okay. I am not that interesting to look at. I'm just an old guy who hasn't flown airplanes in 30 years. I flew airplanes for about 20 years. That kind of does the math pretty well as far as how old I am. And as I said, I retired out of the Air Force with 20 years, 14 days, 2 hours, and 14 minutes. This is me when you're at a party and nobody likes airplanes. And this is me when I first got my own crew. And that hat, that Mack truck hat, I flew always in that from the time I had my own crew. Yes, I flew 3-star generals with that hat on. I flew governors of states. I didn't care. And the thing was, always take the hat off before you get off the airplane, because the general could have you if you wore it off the airplane. But on the plane, my word was God. Went a lot of places. I actually was never permanent assigned outside of the United States, because I was in Strategic Air Command. We were keeping the Russians so scared that they didn't dare do anything. And I've been out at the Air Museum at Falcon Field. Have you all been there? Everybody been there? Good. For a while I was teaching, or I was running the boneyard tours down at Pima. Everybody been there? If you haven't been there recently, you haven't been there. I'm going down for a convention next month. But they decided I had to come down every month. And the last time or every week, excuse me, I was coming down once a month. And the last time I went down there, I had a bird that committed suicide on my car. He got my left front headlight, and I was so glad he got the headlight and not me. And GM has great engineering. The headlight still worked. And I thought all I'd need is a little fairing to replace it. It was $500. Of course, my insurance did me no good. Anyway, so that's me. This is the museum. You've seen that. We're open 7 days a week this time of year. In the summertime, if you decide to come visit us, don't come on Monday and don't come on Tuesday, because we won't be there. Well, we'll actually be there, but we won't let you in. One thing that's new out there, we've got the Army Aviation Heritage Foundation that has, this is does anybody know what this is? This airplane right here? This helicopter. It's not an airplane. It's a UH-1B. Here's a better picture of it. The B model is a short fuselage, and it's a gunship. So until they got the Cobra, this was what passed for a gunship. And you can see, here's the potato shooter right here. And there's actually a potato shooter on the front. This is a later UH-1 cockpit. And they have one airplane that they fly. And when you see that one, and by the way, I highly recommend the ride if you have the bread. It is fun. Okay, and that's the front cockpit. That's the pilot's seat with those knees right there are mine. We are not in flight at this point, sorry. So, and you know, all we can do is remember, and that's what we do at our museum, is push remembering those who served so that we could have our freedoms. One thing, a little shameless self-promotion, because I do a fair amount of that. Gilbert Gilbert Community College has a program out at Sun Lakes, where a bunch of old people like me talk to a bunch of old people like you and tell you things you didn't know, or maybe find out things we didn't know. I'm going to be doing 2 classes in the spring. One is Air Museums in Arizona, and I got some information on you guys so I can talk about you. And the other one is World War II topics, and the April 18th talk is going to be this one, although it's going to be a little bit longer because I've got an hour and a half with them, and I don't have that much with you folks. Just a reminder, it still goes on. Tech Sergeant John Chaplin Chapman just recently was awarded the Medal of Honor for something that happened in 2002. And you say, hold it, why does it take so long? Have you ever been to the Pentagon? You go to the end of the hall to find the office you're looking for, and there is no end to that hall. They were considering for some time, he had already gotten the Air Force Cross for an operation in Tora Bora, Afghanistan. And after quite a bit of looking and some thinking, they presented his widow back in December with the Medal of Honor. Late, but appropriate. Just recently finished the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, and there's an Irish Jesuit priest here, Father Willie Doyle, who was put in for the Victoria Cross, and there's a movement around to make him a saint. I don't recommend people for sainthood one way or the other, not that mine would matter. And we forget too often the dogs. Mako was just recently killed over in Afghanistan. He was a multi-purpose dog, veteran of 6 tours in Afghanistan, trained patrol, detect, bombs, clear buildings, and he actually was killed by a Taliban terrorist when he flushed the SOB out of his hiding place. And Stars and Stripes on the 9th of December. It's an empty kennel, husbands coming home to their wives, kids getting to see their fathers once more, and rangers getting to live and fight another day because of a military dog. And all we can do is remember. We have a good time. We have a good time at the museum, but keep that in mind.
I don't know if you read our PowerPoint that I sent you email-wise, but we have a section that we proposed a small cemetery
For
for
military dogs.
military service dogs.
Yep.
Because they won't allow burial in any of our national cemeteries.
Okay. In my day, we worked for this guy. Everybody knows who he is? Curtis LeMay. Yeah, damn thing wouldn't dare blow up. He always had a cigar. It was very seldom lit, but he'd walk up to an airplane with that cigar in his mouth, and it's very common for somebody to say, "Sir, you really shouldn't have that cigar there." Damn thing wouldn't dare blow up. Okay, we're going to talk about delivering the atom bombs and ending the worst war in world history, World War II. Primarily August 1945. Check your cell phone. Mine's out in my, well no, actually usually I leave mine in my car, but I brought it in so I could call. All right. We're going to talk about the 509th Composite Group. It wasn't just a bomb group, it was a composite group. It had the whole shot. It had bombers, it had transport planes to support its own needs, it had cops, it had supply people, it had the whole shot. And it needed them. We'll talk about why. Commander was a guy named Tibbets, Paul Tibbets, Jr. If you're looking for a good book, this is a very good book. I'm not going to talk about too much with the background of World War II, but Victor Davis Hanson has a new book that came out just late last year called The Second World Wars. Wars. And the touchline for that is when his uncles would get together on the farm in California and talk about their experiences in the war, he'd go, "Doesn't sound like you were doing any of the same things. One was in Europe, one was in the Navy in the South Pacific, one went to Alaska." But it really was, it was a multitude of wars, and it really was the whole world involved. We're going to talk about the B-29 Super Fortress, a big airplane. For comparison, a lot of us have seen the B-17, which I think of as a big airplane when you get up close to it. The Super Fortress dwarfs it. Many innovations, many, many problems. Very famous test pilot, Eddie Allen. Most of the first flights in the 1930s and the 1940s
Eddie Allen flew the flight. He was a Boeing employee, but he flew first flights for a lot of Lockheed and Douglas and other airplanes, or other manufacturers' planes. Why? Insurance, of course. The insurance companies would only insure a first flight if Eddie was flying it. He was that good. He did the first test flight of the XB-29 in September of 1942. And they were having a lot of problems with engine fires. Engine fires are never good. But when your fuselage is made out of magnesium to save weight, it's even worse. And February of 43, he was nursing a B-29 back to Boeing Field when he crashed and killed a total of 28 people, about 10 on the airplane and another 18 on the ground. Well, that's not inspiring a lot of confidence. So, the Army Air Forces, Army Air Corps, knew they needed that airplane. They were going to have it to destroy Japan. So, Hap Arnold, the commander of the Air Force, goes to Jimmy Doolittle and says, Jimmy, who would you pick to fix this plane? It's got problems. And Doolittle, who by that time was commanding forces in Europe, immediately said Tibbets. He's the guy. Tibbets became one of the high-time B-29 pilots, and to inspire confidence in the crew members, he trained 2 WASPs, Women's Air Force Service pilots, to train to fly B-29s. And he'd have them fly to B-29 bases, get off the plane, and say, yeah, it's no problem flying that airplane. It makes it tough for the macho man pilot to say, no, that airplane is too dangerous. So Tibbets became the logical choice to fly the atomic bomb missions. Now this is a guy I had not heard about until I started researching for this talk. Uzal, what kind of a name is Uzal? Let's call him UG Ent. There was an Ent Air Force Base or Air Force Station in Colorado, and I always wondered, where did that come from? Ent was the commander of the 2nd Air Force out of Colorado Springs. And so the 509th Composite Group was going to come under his command. He was given 3 names. 1 Brigadier General, 1 full colonel, and Paul Tibbets, who was at that time. He conducted the most destructive bombing mission in world history. 334 B-29s took off. Some of them had to abort into Iwo Jima or back to Tinian. 279 of them dropped over 1,000 tons of cluster bombs and incendiaries on Tokyo. Destroyed the center of the city, 100,000 dead, 1 million made homeless in one night. 509 had nothing to do with this, and that was not popular on Tinian, because the guys that were flying over Japan at 5,000 to 8,000 feet without a gunner except for the tail gunner, and thinking, boy, this is dangerous. What are you guys doing here? Can't tell you. It's secret. So like I say, 509 didn't play at Meeting House or any other of the major attacks over Japan. Well, meanwhile, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Army had business on an island called Okinawa. From April 1st to the 22nd of June, we were invading this, some consider a Japanese home island, and it is part of Japan again. We gave it back. But 20,000 U.S. killed, 55,000 wounded. The Navy lost more ships sunk and damaged in the battle for Okinawa than the whole rest of the war, because the Japanese had discovered the divine wind, the kamikaze, and we didn't know quite what to do with somebody who wants to die more than you want to live. 16 Japanese warships were sunk, including the Yamato, and 1,500 aircraft were lost on the Japanese side. Up to 150,000 Okinawans died, including some that jump off of cliffs because they don't want to be captured by the awful American. So why did we do it? Airfields, including Yantan, that's one of them, and it'll come up in our story again. Okay, I did not go to the trade school in Colorado Springs, the Air Force Academy, but I do occasionally listen to podcasts about instructors, particularly history instructors, talking to the skulls full of mush at the Air Force Academy. And I was particularly taken, the instructor, who was a lieutenant colonel, so he must know what he's talking about, was telling them about the Battle of Okinawa and how many casualties we took and how many ships were sunk. And not this cadet, but a cadet who probably looked just like that one, said, "Yes, cadet. Sir, if they knew they were going to drop the bomb, why did they bother with Okinawa? I don't get it." Now the answer the lieutenant colonel gave was based on this Søren Kierkegaard, who is virtually unpronounceable and is a philosopher because he's unpronounceable. He says life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. It applies to history too. Somebody writes a history looking back and saying, well, of course America was going to win the Second World War. Of course. Yeah, easy for you to say. Not so easy in 41 or even 42 to figure it out. Anyway, that was the colonel's answer. I'm going to give you another answer, and I actually communicated this to him that as an Air Force person, he should have known. So now he can make colonel like me because he knows more. But we'll get to that. Okay, who decided to drop the bomb? Did you decide? Roosevelt? Truman? Well, it's hard to say. There are 3 books out there, Before the Bomb, Racing the Enemy, and Fighting to a Finish. And they all pontificate for hundreds of pages. But remember, FDR died on the 12th of April, 1945, and a guy named Harry S., no middle name, just S., Truman, who had talked to the president one time after the election and was not even aware of the bomb, becomes president. OMG. What am I going to do? One can make the argument, and some do, that nobody actually made the decision, that certainly Truman didn't, that events just kind of had a momentum of their own. Leslie Groves, who was a civil engineer, who thought he would be a great combat commander, and after building the Pentagon, that 5-sided puzzle palace that everybody goes to the end of the hall at, he thought, okay, now I'm going to get my combat job. And instead he gets put in charge of the Manhattan Project. A bunch of pointy-headed geek scientists designing something he can't even understand. Really? This is how you treat me? Well, the 509th mission was the confluence, the joining of the 2 most expensive programs in World War II. The B-29 program cost $5 billion with a B dollars. And the Manhattan Project cost $2 billion. So there's a total of $7 billion that somebody's going to have to explain to Congress if this doesn't work, if we don't end up with a product. So Tibbets is put in charge of the product. He has to find a place to practice. Practice. And we'll talk about why he has to practice. He considered several places, but he finally decided on Wendover, Utah. Anybody ever been to Wendover, Utah? Middle of nowhere, isn't it? You go to the Great Salt Lake, and before you get to Nowhere, Nevada, just as you're still in Utah, there's Wendover. You are not at the end of the world, but you can see the end of the world from there. Think of it as the hub of a great wheel, which is to say, you're in the middle of nowhere. And that's what he needed, because they needed to do a lot of practicing of what they were going to have to do. Wendover was not built for him. It had been there for some time, and it was a training base that a lot of heavy bomber units had come to practice before they went overseas. 3 8,000-foot runways in a triangle. It's a great place to practice. They would do multiple what they called pumpkin bomb drops. The pumpkin bomb was shaped like the atomic bomb, actually the second one. But the other thing they had to do is practice what they called the escape maneuver. Because normally in a B-17 or a B-24, you come over the top of the target, you drop the bomb, and you keep going. And they figured with the destructive power of the atomic bomb, if you did that, you're dead. D-E-A-D, dead. So he had to design a maneuver to get at least 6 to 7 miles of separation. And then he had to teach all of his pilots how to do that maneuver. And you had to do it just right, because if you overdid it, you could stall the tail and you could fall like a stone. And you're DED dead anyway. Okay. 2 types of what they called, and still call, special weapons, which is to say nuclear bombs. The first one, the uranium bomb, very simple fuse. Anybody could make that fuse work. In fact, one of the pointy-headed guys in New Mexico had inadvertently almost done one in a box, just pushing little bits of uranium together until it started to chain react. And he died from the radiation. 140 pounds of uranium-235 it took to make this thing work. So it's very simple. It was never tested. Tibbets thinks on the way to Hiroshima, I've never dropped a bomb that was never tested until this one. Well, half of the world's supply of U-235 was in that bomb. That's why. The other one was the plutonium bomb. Complex, very complex fuses. But it only took 15 pounds of plutonium to generate about the same amount of destruction. So, very important. Okay, if you're really into the science and all that kind of whiz-bang, good book, The Manhattan Project, and if you're into the kind of the cloak and dagger, nobody was ever assigned to Los Alamos or to the Manhattan Project. You might be told you were going to the Manhattan Engineering District, and you'd think you'd get on a train to New York or something. You'd actually get orders to go to 109 East Palace in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And there was a nice little lady behind the desk that would check you in and put you on a bus up to wherever it was. Anyway, so back to the 509th Composite Group, where they didn't design the bomb, they're just supposed to deliver the bomb. They had a ground echelon of about 44 officers and 815 enlisted men. They had their own armorers, their own support staff, and very importantly, their own security police. And everybody had been drilled and drilled and drilled that you don't talk about what goes on here, because you could lose the war. And they caught several people that were talking, and they were on a one-way trip to somewhere way up in Canada or way up in Alaska where they could talk to the caribou. There's an air echelon of 29 officers, 61 enlisted men. They had very specialized bombers. We'll talk about those. And they had their own transport aircraft. Because when they needed stuff, they needed it now. When they needed people somewhere, they needed them there yesterday. Eventually, they get done with their training at Wendover, and they're told, you're going to Tinian, right there, in the Marianas Islands. So they're all going to fly their airplanes to Tinian, and we're going to have problems on the way. One problem was one of the silver plate B-29s was parked on a ramp with a security policeman guarding it, and a colonel, Army Air Corps colonel, comes up and says, "Hey, need airplane, can I get a tour?" "No, sir, you cannot." "Ah, come on," blah, 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 blah. The security policeman literally had to draw down on the colonel. And Tibbets came out and said, "Colonel, you're not going on that airplane. And if you've got any questions, you call General Arnold, the commander of the Air Force. He will confirm what I just told you." Not often that a general is told by a mere lieutenant colonel and a sergeant with a gun. Of course, I always figured, the guy with the gun, yes sir, 3 bags full. Okay. The other one was one of their C-54s were brand new, delivered to them. And they're a pretty nice cargo plane. Very nice in the late stages of the war. And a captain wanted a ride with them. "Hey, can I get a ride from California to Hawaii? Save me some time, save me some money. I don't want to go on a boat, yada, yada, yada." "No, sir, you can't." Same story. Okay, so the targets. Hiroshima, Kyoto, which was removed from the target list because the Secretary of War, that's who the Army works for, he'd gone on his honeymoon in Kyoto, so he didn't want it to go poof. Okay, fine. Kokura, Yokohama, Niigata, and Nagasaki. Kokura was actually the planned second target. Hiroshima was always the planned first target. Okay, they had some senior leadership there. I don't really care too much about them, except here's Tibbets. Notice he's in shorts. Remember, it's Tinian, it's August, it's hot and humid. Parsons is a weaponeer. He flew on both of the nuclear missions. He was the guy that knew how to make the gadget go. But they didn't know if the gadget would actually explode, particularly the plutonium device. They weren't sure. So in July of 1945, at that spot right there, they built a tower. And they hoisted the bomb up there, and on it, literally a dark and stormy night, they set it off. And it went boom. It really went boom. They put the story out in the newspapers that a ammunition depot had blown up. And everybody goes, "Oh, okay, that happens all the time." But it sure was a bright flash. That's what it looked like. This was, what was it? It was 16/100ths of a second after detonation. That is 100 meters. Don't want to be there. The funny thing with that, and I don't get too much into the making of the bomb, but they were so concerned about the plutonium that they actually had the bomb encased in a steel case in case it was a dud, so they didn't lose all the plutonium. And that just turned into more stuff going up into the stratosphere. Okay, so we're at Tinian, and we've got the assembly building here, and their weaponeers would put both of the bombs together in that building. It was tightly guarded at all times. I'm sorry, no tours. I don't care who you are. General LeMay, you can't come on board because you're not cleared for this. All they were doing was practicing the crazy turn. Now, I have an animation of that I can't use here. So when we get to the crazy turn, I'll try to describe it, like all pilots do with their hands. But that escape turn was very important. You had to get 6 to 7 miles away from where the bomb exploded, or you're dead. 15 practice bombing runs on nearby islands. There was a couple of little islands that had been bypassed in the Marianas, and there was a little group of Japanese there that are going, oh man, will somebody come get us? Because those darn Air Force bombers are dropping bombs on us and we got nothing to shoot with. We haven't had any food. I'm really tired of coconuts and pineapple. 12 combat missions over Japan with pumpkin bombs, those big round bombs, and flying a 3-ship formation, so that the Japanese get used to what they're seeing. 3 ships, okay, it's a pumpkin bomb, a couple of 100 pounds of explosives, whoop-de-doo, it's not worth our time. Building the expectation in the Japanese mind that we don't have to mess with these guys. They're not worth the trouble. They also did component tests with inert shapes of a little boy and a fat man. And they did an inert bomb load exercise at Iwo Jima. We'll talk about why they did that. Okay, has everybody heard of the USS Indianapolis? Okay. Big smoke. The uranium for the first bomb came across on the Indianapolis. She was a fast, heavy cruiser. She departed San Francisco on the 16th of July, 45. She actually set a speed record going to Honolulu, faster than anybody had gone at that point. Arrived at Tinian and offloaded that crate, which had been guarded by a bunch of Marines the whole way across, who had no sense of humor whatsoever. I mean, some people thought that was a new car for Admiral Halsey or something. They had no idea what was in the box, and that was the way they wanted it. Carried 1/2 of the world's supply of uranium-235. Imagine if that boat or ship had been sunk on the way to Tinian. When they left Tinian, they were sent to the Philippines. They were sent out without destroyer escort. They were not briefed on any submarine activity along their route, and the operation of the ship was left up to the discretion of the captain. And on a dark and not so stormy night, he decided we could make better time not zigzagging and went to bed. A little bit later, a little bit of a moon broke out, and the officer of the watch wasn't really sure, didn't really want to wake the captain up, didn't really want to make a decision, so they didn't zigzag. And out there was a Japanese submarine which put a couple of fish into them and they sank. Okay. Their distress calls, which were sent out, were ignored by 3 different stations. And the policy at that time in the far western Pacific was that nobody reported the non-arrival of a combatant vessel. The theory was maybe he was directed to go somewhere else. It's none of our business if he doesn't get here. So for days, the 900 of the crew of 1,269 that went into the water are being shark food. About 300 were ultimately rescued when, just by sheer luck, a patrol plane noticed them. Now there's a lot of blame that you could lay on here. Blame the people who didn't tell the captain that there was sub-activity. Blame the people who didn't send a destroyer or 2 or 3 with a heavy cruiser. But the captain gets the blame, gets court-martialed, and he will actually commit suicide feeling the responsibility for the deaths that happened. But an important ship, an important part of our story. Okay, so again, we're talking about B-29, B-17 comparison. 20 feet longer, 40-foot additional wingspan, double the engine power. This is one mean airplane. Nice airplane to fly in because it's pressurized. The B-17, the B-24, they fly at 25, 30,000 feet, where it's 55 below zero. And, okay, yeah, there's supposedly a heater that doesn't work. There is electric underwear that you hope works, because if it doesn't, you're probably going to get frostbite. But in the B-29, you literally could be in shirt sleeve. You could be sitting there operating your equipment just like we're sitting here now, because it was pressurized, it was heated, it was great. It also had remote control turrets, so one guy could be shooting at several different airplanes, although, except for the tail gun, all of that nonsense was pulled off of the, what they call the silver plate airplanes. What they had done, the silver plate airplanes, which are the ones that are nuclear qualified or nuclear capable, would go higher, go faster. They had much more powerful engines than the standard B-29, and they had reversible props, which comes in handy later on. Okay, it was originally called the Model 345, first flight in September 42, over 1 million rivets, that's just public relations garbage from Boeing, and 55,000 parts made all over the country. 3,970 were built, including an additional 847 unauthorized B-29 copies made by our allies, the Russians, after they captured a couple of them that crash-landed in their territory. Hey, that looks good. Let's copy some. Think they ever paid Boeing a dime? No, they did not. It does include, 3970 includes 87 that were delivered to the RAF as Washington B-1 bombers, and 4 that were given to the Navy for no apparent reason to be T-2Bs. They were built at 5 factories, but the silver plate airplanes were only built at the Martin Company plant in Omaha. Anybody ever been to Offutt Air Force Base or Omaha, Nebraska? In my world, it's awful Air Force Base, and oh my God, Nebraska. But that's another story. Okay. This is what the production line would have looked like. And they were special airplanes, operated engines. The biggest difference was in the bomb bay. 2 bomb bays, one forward, one aft. Special single release H-frame in the forward bomb bay, and a fuel tank in the aft bomb bay to get additional range. Rapid opening pneumatic bomb bay doors. Fast open, fast close. They built all the silver plate bombers. Interestingly, on the 15th of September, the Martin, Omaha workers all got a letter that said, you have served your nation and your company well. And oh, by the way, your paycheck stopped now. Thank you very much. Okay, special engine, 3,800 horsepower, fuel injected, increased power output, and reversible props, which most B-29s didn't have. Here are the 3 most important airplanes in our story: Enola Gay, Boxcar, and the Great Artiste. And those all have a big role to play in our story. Tinian, Iwo Jima, okay, here's Guam, Tinian, Saipan. Iwo Jima's here, Japan, of course, and just for reference, Okinawa's there. We're going to fly out of Northfield at Tinian, 1,500 miles from Japan. Okinawa is about the halfway point. And in the early stages of the bombing, before the 509th got there, when Iwo was under Japanese control, all the Japanese fighter planes in Japan knew when the B-29s were coming, because there was a radar station and a radio transmitting facility on Iwo. Once management was transferred at the cost of many, many Marine lives, there was now an airfield on Iwo where an injured or problem B-29 could set down, and actually more B-29 crew members were saved from dying at sea than the cost that we had paid in Marine lives to take Iwo Jima. Check the numbers. And there's the field. Notice 4 runways. You could actually have airplanes taking off 4 abreast. We don't do that anymore. All right. Originally, the mission was supposed to be in the middle of August. But the weather people were looking forward and said, weather in the middle of August is going to be lousy. We need to push it up. So on the 6th of August, the first mission was going to go to Hiroshima in Enola Gay. But before we send it, we're Americans. We're nice guys. We dropped leaflets. The leaflets look just like this. We dropped them all over Japan. And they said, your city may be bombed. You should evacuate from here immediately, or the devastation will be terrible and deadly. Hey, you've been warned. Going to use the Norden bomb site, the primary visual bomb site of World War II, actually dated back to 1924, and it will be used in combat as late as 1967 in Vietnam. Has crosshairs, and kind of an interesting story. The Nordens that were made during World War II, many of them had hair from a gal in Pueblo, Colorado, Mary Babnick Brown. She was 34, she was blonde, she had never used chemicals on her hair and never used heat. So she gets a request from, I believe it was Washington State University, but just some school, asking for blonde hair at least 22 inches long. Well, her hair was clear down to her, not quite to her ankles, but to her knees. And she gave all of her hair because they said it was going to be towards the war effort. She was never told what it was used for. She said, I cried for a month after I gave my hair away because she'd been so proud of it. Now they offered her war bonds, actually war stamps for the hair. She turned it down because she figured it's my little bit to do for the cause. She didn't know what it was used for until November of 1987 when she turned 80 years old, and President Ronald Reagan sent her a letter letting her know, declassifying what her hair had been used for. So all those bombardiers that were looking through the crosshairs, it was Mary Brown's hair that they were looking through. On the B-29, there was also a radar position. They could bomb by radar as well as using the visual means. But somehow, this is going to tell you where to drop the bomb. And that's back in the aft compartment. It's not like you could cheat and look out the window. But somehow you could also bomb that way. Final non-nuclear mission, the day before, they're still worrying about the fusing mechanism on these pumpkin bombs. So Sweeney, the guy who will fly the second attack mission, drops a pumpkin bomb near Tinian to test the fuses. And if all the fuses work, they should have seen a puff of smoke. There's no nuclear material in a puff of smoke at 2,000 feet. They all had to operate for Fat Man to operate, and guess what? The test fails. Oh dear. Oh well, that's the second bomb. We know the first one will work. So on the 6th, we go ahead with the mission. This is actually a copy of the flight order that said who, where, when, why, and how. Interestingly, religious services, 2,200 for the Catholics, because we talk slower and in Latin, and 2,230 for the Protestants. This you have on the back of your list, and this is who flew where and why. Okay, so weather reconnaissance to Hiroshima, Kokura, and Nagasaki. So primary, second, alternates. They're going to report what the weather is at each of those targets. And the weather for Hiroshima on the 6th of August was excellent. CAVU. Clear and visibility unlimited. So, the weapons delivery airplane is Paul Tibbets in Enola Gay, named for his mom. The instrumentation airplane is the Great Artiste, flown by Sweeney, and that was his regular airplane. And George Marquardt was the photography airplane. They were hoping to have photographs of the bomb. The photography mission goes okay, but the camera doesn't work. And that's not unusual. So no pictures of that first mission. That's nothing on Marquardt, it's just the equipment didn't work. And then McKnight, this was a spare airplane. He was actually at Iwo Jima, and he was there in case there was problem with Enola Gay. Tibbets could drop into Iwo, they could transfer the bomb to the airplane top secret and go on. Tibbets had everything figured out. Nothing is going to mess his mission up. Well, day of the mission, Enola Gay, everything is code 1. The bomb is fine. The bomb bay is fine. No maintenance disruptions. No operational delays. I mean, this is text gay. The bomber is the way we... Great Artiste, which is the instrumentation airplane on both missions, and Boxcar is the photographic airplane. Now the second mission, Boxcar will become the primary for dropping the bomb. Great Artiste, because of all the equipment, stays in that position. One of the airplanes doesn't show up for the second mission. And you may be wondering, why is one name highlighted on there? And that's why. Okay, so first mission, we're going to use the uranium bomb, 140 pounds of U-235, 16 kiloton yield. This is what she looks like. This is actually a model that was in my museum for a couple of years. And the first week that it was there, a very nice lady was wagging her finger at me saying, "How can you possibly be exhibiting such a weapon of mass destruction?" We will return to that. I did some research. So if she'd ever come back, I would have had an answer. Better answer than I did. So you got the gadget at the front. That's the atomic material and the high explosives to make it work. And you've got the California parachute. It's not really a parachute, it's just to make it stable in its drop. Okay, there'll be a test. This is how you make an atomic bomb. All you need is 160 pounds of uranium, and you can do it. This is, by the way, unclassified. It's from the book, The Story of Little Boy and Fat Man, dated 2003. So you can't shoot me for giving out classified information. I didn't. Okay, Tibbets came in the Air Force in 37, pilot qualified in 38, led the first B-17 raid into Europe in 42, had over 40 combat missions in B-17s. He flew Major General Mark Clark and Lieutenant General Dwight Eisenhower to Gibraltar, and he had a reputation for being a good pilot. He returned to the U.S., like we said, in 43 to take over the B-29 program. Everybody remember 12 O'Clock High? Greatest war movie ever made. I knew the Air Force was in trouble when I heard they were no longer using that at Squadron Officer School and in ROTC to teach command. This is a good movie. Major Cobb, the guy who's at the bar and gives General Savage some lip and becomes the operations officer. He was modeled on Major Tibbets at the time. Also, by the way, General Savage here was modeled on General Armstrong, who will be the general who was considered for the atomic mission against Tibbets, and who was actually Tibbets' boss. That was interesting. Okay, here's Tibbets with his ground crew, Tibbets with his flight crew. One particular guy I want to mention is Major Theodore Dutch Van Kirk. Dutch is one of my favorite people. He was giving a talk to a bunch of high school students, history students. And the teacher said, "I need to introduce Major Theodore Dutch Van Kirk, who participated in the infamous bombing raid on Hiroshima in World War XI. Okay, I'm Van Kirk. I'm sitting there listening to you say there was a World War XI. I look at you, and and I'd just get up and walk out. I think he should have said something, but okay. Anyway, flew 58 missions overseas, joined the 509. He was a good navigator. He hit his point over the target in Hiroshima within 15 seconds of the estimated time over a 15-hour flight. Another one of my favorites, Jacob Beezer. Has anybody heard of electronic warfare officers? Is anybody an electronic warfare officer? Okay. EOs in the B-52 business are the most disrespected guys on the airplane until you get into actual combat, and then they are the wizards, and everybody wants to give them the coffee instead of saying, hey, EO, you got nothing to do, get me some coffee. Beezer was the first electronic warfare officer, although he never had a set of these wings. He was just a guy who had gone to Johns Hopkins, and because he had some tech training, he was assigned to the Manhattan Project, and he was the expert on all the fusing, all the electronics, all the radar, and all that kind of stuff. And why was he along? To make sure that the Japanese didn't jam or cause the bomb to go off prematurely. Because it's really embarrassing if 16 kilotons goes off in your bomb bay instead of on or close to the ground. Now, Beezer was indeed the first electronic warfare officer because he was on both missions, and both missions he slept all the way from takeoff until about an hour out of the target. They woke him up, he did his thing, and he went back to sleep. He was like my wife, an Olympic class sleeper. All right. There's a loading pit. Here's a loading pit on Tinian. There was also one on Iwo. Like I mentioned, Tibbetts was taking no chances. If my airplane breaks, we can drop in there and swap the bomb. Taking no chances. Both bombs were set for an air burst, not a ground burst, because they didn't want a lot of fallout. They wanted blast effect, but not too much fallout, because they figured the Japanese are going to surrender, we're going to have to occupy this territory. We don't want a lot of fallout. The B-29 will be flying along at 300 miles an hour at 30,000 feet. Okay. Now, right here, see all this nice stuff? That is a very nice graphic that would show you what I'm going to try to do with this hand. But I can't get it because we don't have internet in here. So you're coming along at 300 miles an hour, and you drop the bomb. As soon as you drop the bomb, you start a tight power-on diving turn, 50 degrees of bank, which in a big airplane is scary. And as tight as you can make it, and what you're trying to do is just have that tail fin on the back almost stalled out. Not quite stalled, because if you stall it, you got a problem. Tight a turn as you can get, and then you haul spuds the other direction. If you do it right, the bomb is going to fly forward for 45 seconds until it hits the planned explosion height of 2,000 feet above the ground. And in that 45 seconds, you can get 6 to 7 miles of separation, and maybe you'll survive. And that's all the scientists would say. Maybe you'll survive. You get to 6 to 7, you may survive. Less than that, you're not going to make it. Okay. This is what happened. This is Hiroshima after the fact, and you notice the picture is signed by Tibbetts. 20,000 soldiers, because it was a major military headquarters. Also 70,000 civilians. Pretty well flattened. Enola Gay flew all the way back to Tinian and landed, and the airplane was still, everything was working great. Okay, gonna be a piece of cake. We don't have to worry about these. The only thing we gotta worry about is whether that dumb bomb will work. But okay, we're going to send another one. When? Here's the Peace Memorial. And this was actually, that was the ground zero. That was the target aiming point. But remember, they didn't fly over it and drop it. They threw it forward. And so they had an aiming point short of that they were actually using. Okay. Enola Gay is, of course, now in the Smithsonian. If you ever go to Washington, don't waste your time going to see Congress because they're not doing anything. Go out to Dulles and visit the Udvar Hazy Museum there. They've got everything, and that's what you can do if you've got a guy with a really weird name and $65 million to spend. Okay, this is the orders for the second mission. And notice, Hopkins is the guy who signs the orders, and he's flying with somebody else's crew. He really thought that because he outranked Sweeney, who is the pilot of the delivery airplane, that he should be the pilot of the delivery airplane. And when he was not chosen for that job, he really didn't want to listen to the formation briefing that is mandatory when you do something like this. And he was not paying very good attention, because I should be in charge instead of him. I've always figured, if you're not in charge, say thank you and be exactly where you're supposed to be. He could have listened to that. Well, we can't fly over Iwo because the weather is lousy. Those weather guys were right. The weather's getting worse and worse and worse. So we have to fly this routing, and the rendezvous point is being Yakushima, which is a lot closer to Japan, and there's a lot more time to get somebody lost. We're going to be using the plutonium bomb, 15 pounds of plutonium. Ends up being about 21 kiloton yield. Bigger bomb, bigger boom than Hiroshima, but will do a lot less damage, and I'll explain to you why. This is Fat Man. This is actually a picture at the Nuclear Museum in Albuquerque of a replica of Fat Man. That's how he works. There'll be a test. If you can make all that work, you too can make a plutonium bomb, and it only takes 15 pounds of it. Okay, again, the gadget and the California parachute. Sweeney, he's the pilot for the second strike mission. He was flying the number 2 airplane, the instrumentation airplane, on the number 1 mission. He had never flown in combat before. He came into the Air Force in '41. He was a base operations officer and an engineering test pilot. He flew a lot of different airplanes. He very quickly established himself as an instructor pilot in the 509th and the B-29, and a real expert on the airplane. That's why Tibbets picked him for this mission, because he knew more about that airplane than anybody else. Okay? This is his first actual combat bombing mission. Okay, handling Fat Man. It's big, it's heavy, it barely fits. Here's the crew for the, and just something to mention here. If you come out to my museum, you can actually meet this guy's son. He was the assigned co-pilot on that crew, but because Sweeney took the place of his pilot, Charlie Bach, he really didn't have much of a seat to sit in most of the time. And most of what he did was shoot flares, but we'll talk about that. Anyway, so there is no Hiroshima, so we don't need anybody to check the weather in Hiroshima. So we're checking Kokura and Nagasaki, primary and secondary target. Weapons delivery is Sweeney, Bach's airplane is being flown by Sweeney, so Bach is flying Sweeney's airplane. Is that confusing? Well, it was certainly confusing to Hopkins because he thought he should have been in charge of the whole thing. And we always have a spare airplane, and again, in this case, that guy didn't have to fly the mission. He just sat at Iwo waiting. Okay, this is an are you kidding me? A $2 billion project. Here's the gadget, here's the parachute. when they went to put the parachute on the gadget, the holes didn't line up. The holes didn't line up. So they had a rat tail file. It's the afternoon before the mission. There's some guy out there. Now, I will say they were smart. They didn't use the rat tail file on the gadget. They used it on the California parachute. But they were expanding the hole so that it would fit. You can't make this stuff up. I mean, what do you expect for only $2 billion? The B-29s used reverse pitch on the props to back over the pit to load the bomb. It was, as you see, for Fat Man, a tight fit. And then the bomb was connected to the aircraft. Okay, so we come to the 9th of August, 1945. Sweeney and crew go out to Boxcar. The bomb's okay. He didn't actually find out about that rat tail file business until about 10 years later. Nobody wanted to tell him that. But that fuel tank in the aft bomb bay has a pump in it. Without that pump, you can't get the fuel out of there. There is 4,300 pounds of dead weight fuel he cannot use. Can't siphon it, can't drain it, can't dump it, can't do anything. Sweeney decides to go. Hey, I'm gonna do this mission. Tibbetts says, okay, but you don't delay more than 15 minutes for anything. I don't care what. You keep on going. 15 minutes. So we're going to blast off out of Tinian with our airplanes. We're going to rendezvous over Yakushima, and then we're going to go bomb Kokura. Where is Dimples 90? So when they get to Yakushima, missing. The camera plane is missing. I'm going to sit down for a minute because we're going to be talking about the camera plane for quite a while. Hopkins was a really by-the-book guy. And his camera operator, the whole reason for the mission was that camera. The only guy who knows how to operate the camera shows up at the plane without his parachute. Now Hopkins throws him off the plane. He doesn't say, hey, somebody get him a chute right now. He throws the only person who knows how to operate the camera. The only reason for him to go is the camera. He throws the guy off the plane because he forgot his parachute. All right, fine. He also, Hopkins, did not listen to the briefing. He could get to 39,000 feet, and so he did. The bomb-laden airplane could only get to 30,000 feet. So he goes as high as he can go. He gets to the point. He's looking around, not seeing them. They're looking around, not seeing him. He's almost 10,000 feet too high. And if you're looking this way, you're not going to see somebody way out there. And to compound the stupidity, when an hour has passed and he heads back, he goes on the radio, which he was told not to do. No, 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 radio silence. And transmits, and I quote, has Sweeney aborted. Now the radio he was transmitting on would be something like this. Has Sweeney aborted. A lot of static. The message gets back as Sweeney aborted. So all the folks that were supposed to be in submarines watching for the route that they were flying to recover the airplane if they had to ditch are released. Now how do we know all this? This guy, Group Captain Leonard Cheshire. He was a commander of the 617 Squadron of the Royal Air Force. Not the one that flew the Dam Buster raid, but he took the place of the guy who flew the Dam Buster Ray. And he had flown a lot of really interesting missions in the Lancaster. He knew wherever he was talking. And he was stationed in the aft compartment. And because he was invited forward to the cockpit by Hopkins, he was actually there to be looking at the altimeter. And altimeters work just the same in English airplanes as they do in American. It's not too hard to tell whether you're at 300 or 390. But to get up there, he couldn't have his parachute on when he came through the tunnel. So when he's looking at that, and he's not going to say a word to Hopkins, because he's not sure Hopkins might throw him out. After all, he threw the camera operator out. So Cheshire reports to us all this stuff that had happened. We now understand why Hopkins says he went to where he was supposed to go, and why Sweeney and Bach couldn't see him. Okay. Where is Dimples 90? Can't see him. Really good visibility, but you're not looking up. Okay, Hopkins, what do you do with a guy that does stuff like this? Well, you give him the Bronze Star. You promote him to lieutenant colonel, and you make him the ops officer, and you send him to Walker Air Force Base. God looks down on these things, and a few years later he was killed in a C-124 crash flying from Walker Air Force Base. Anybody know where Walker is? Oh, good. Nobody should. And to Mildenhall. Everybody knows where Mildenhall is. It's in England. Good place to go to. Anyway, so it was again an airburst. But it's at Nagasaki. Why is it at Nagasaki? Well, after waiting 45 minutes, 3 times longer than Tibbets said he was allowed to wait anywhere, Sweeney finally flies on to his primary target, of Kokura. The geniuses at the five-sided puzzle palace in Washington, the Pentagon, had said he must drop the bomb visually. They've got to see their target in that visual bomb site. They had the capability of radar bombing, but no. One thing you learn is you make one run at your primary target. If it's socked in, you go to your secondary. He made not one, not two, but 3 runs. Every time the bombardier is straining at that Norden bomb site. Please, God, let me see it. And he doesn't see his target. So they keep that 10,000-pound bomb in the bomb bay. Well, now they're heading home. We can't make it to Tinian. We are far from being able to make it to Tinian. We can't even make it to Iwo, which is half as far. We might make it to Okinawa. But fortunately for us, Nagasaki is on the route from Kokura to Okinawa. And Nagasaki had some cloud cover. We know that it did. But the bombardier says, I got the target visually. He drops the bomb, and it comes down on the wrong side of a hill. Now, I think he dropped it on radar and was doing a little bit of fudging there, but hey, he's an officer and a gentleman. I am not questioning him at all, but I'm sure everybody on that airplane was so happy to have that 10,000 pounds of dead weight gone. And it made a big boom. It actually landed overhead the biggest Catholic church in Japan. And that's what it looked like from the coast, looking back towards Nagasaki. A really big bang. Okay, so now we're on our way home. Well, we're not on our way home, we're home going to somewhere. Sweeney does not know, but all of the rescue airplanes, all the rescue submarines have been canceled because of Hopkins' unauthorized radio call. They pick Okinawa to go to. And this is Yontan Field. It's 400 miles from Nagasaki. Iwo Jima's 750, can't make it there. Tinian's 1500, ain't no way. We're gonna have to swim. So we get one shot at Yontan Airfield in Okinawa. Here we are coming in. There it is. Oh yes, what don't we have? We don't got no fuel. Well, we got 4,300 pounds in that Bombay tank, but we can't use it. And the things that are most useless is altitude above you, runway behind you, and fuel you cannot use. So, this is where Sweeney's knowledge of the airplane comes into play. He knew that if you pulled the props back to 1,600 RPM, which was well below the recommended, he could squeeze just a little bit of range out of that airplane. The fuel burn now is down to 300 gallons an hour, but he's got 75 minutes till he gets to Okinawa. The flight engineer reports all gauges read empty before they land. Oh dear, that's not good. And about that time, one of the engines dies because there's no fuel coming to it, and that's what they do. Okay, so we're coming in hot, fast. We're coming in high, we're coming in off course, we're not expected. The co-pilot, remember the guy I mentioned that his son works at my museum? He's given the very pistol, this thing right here, and he's told, fire all the flares. Well, which ones? All of them. He fires off aircraft in distress, wounded on board, casualties on board, aircraft emergency, ditching the aircraft. Basically what he's saying is, get that out of my way. I'm coming in. Well, are we going to end up like this? I hope not. We're high. Ooh. We're hot. We're going too fast. It's an unstable approach. Everybody's going to get airsick from all the moving around. Sweeney's trying to side slip the airplane to get it down on the runway. He's off center line. There's a whole bunch of traffic flying around that isn't expecting him, and they're trying to figure out, how can he be ditching? Now, the only flare they apparently saw was the ditching flare. Anyway, we have to land now. Okay. When they touched down, the second engine shut down for lack of fuel, and they rolled to the end of the runway, and the flight engineer actually, when they got towed back into parking, dipped all the tanks, not including the 4,300 pounds that's trapped in the Bombay, because he can't use that. They had 7 gallons total in all the tanks that they could use. Okay. Well, guess who's there? Guess who finds out that, from the control tower, some crazy person just about crashed a B-29 on your airfield. General, do you want to talk to the pilot? You darn right I do. So, Doolittle was just setting up shop on that airfield to do B-29 bombing raids on Japan. More of the same stuff that was going on from Tinian, but from a much closer base. So the leader of the first raid on Japan is now going to debrief the pilot of the final, what turns out to be the final atomic mission. And what does Doolittle say? I can only tell you what they said to me, he began with a smile creasing the corners of his mouth and spreading across his broad face. Well done. Okay. Meanwhile, the crew, hey, what does crew do while they're on the ground? They've got 4 hours before they're going to take off back to Tinian. They go to the chow hall. They can't talk to anybody, but they can listen. And what they heard was an expert on the chow line reported to them that a very powerful bomb had been delivered by a P-38 fighter plane. It was the size of a tennis ball or maybe a basketball. But the one thing the guy had right, the war will soon be over. The guy had almost every technical detail wrong, but he did have the ultimate meaning right, that the war will soon be over. So they get back in their plane, they fly back to Tinian, and Boxcar is currently on exhibit at the U.S. Air Force Museum in Dayton. Okay,
Excellent museums.
except they don't turn the lights on. It's so dark in there. I mean, they've got government funding. Why don't they turn on some lights or get some little LED? Anyway, yes, it is. Napoleon Bonaparte. Notice we're both tall. Napoleon Bonaparte, before he gave any field marshal his marshal's baton, would ask them, "Are you lucky?" So my question is, was Sweeney lucky? Okay, so the next question becomes, okay, 2 big bangs. Do you have another? Please, sir, may I have another? Notice, and remember I was talking about who authorized this? On this letter from the Pentagon to General Groves, there's a handwritten note down here. Can you all see it? Right there. 8/10/45, the day after the second bomb. And what it says is, the third bomb is not to be released on Japan until express authority from the president. Something makes me think that Truman said, "Who signed off on those? I didn't sign off on that. The buck stops here. Buck never got here." Well, could see. So, VJ Day is either the 15th of August or the 2nd of September. MacArthur gets to sign the surrender document on the 2nd of September, but that was mostly a formality. It was over when the Japanese said, "We give up." Remember the lady that was griping at me about how can you display a weapon of mass destruction? This is an exhibit, something I added to that exhibit while it was at our place. Purple Heart was first awarded in April of 1917. It's given to all those military personnel wounded or killed while serving in the military services. During World War II, nearly 500,000 Purple Hearts were manufactured in anticipation of the casualties for the Japanese attack. So, if you know somebody who got a Purple Heart in Korea, Vietnam, both Persian Gulf Wars, the Iraq War, and the war in Afghanistan, and here's the numbers, thank you to the people who didn't have those Purple Hearts awarded to them for attacking Japan, because we haven't needed to buy a Purple Heart since World War II, because we ordered so many in anticipation of the casualties in Japan. You get a lot of the pointy-headed academics from UC Berkeley or UCLA or Arizona State say, "Well, you know, I don't know." One thing I do know, if you know anybody who was anywhere in the Pacific Theater, they say, "Thank God that bomb was dropped." And Dutch Van Kirk, the guy I was telling you about that wouldn't talk about World War XI, he never questioned dropping the bomb. He was asked, not by a teacher who thought there was a World War X, but by a real teacher, "What do you think? Should we have done it?" He said, "Excuse me, hell yes, I'd do it again." Okay, so Harry Truman was quite certain, this is on the 11th, says, "No one is more disturbed over the use of atomic bombs. When you have to deal with a beast, you have to treat him as a beast. It is regrettable, but nonetheless true." Okay, fine. If you want to read up on atomic bombs, you know, like you're an aspiring terrorist and you want to learn how to make them, these are actually unclassified documents. The trick now is getting your 140 pounds of uranium, or your 15 pounds of plutonium. Richard Rhodes, Making of the Bomb, or atom bombs. If you're like me, more interested in the flying side of it, Enola Gay is the story of Tibbets's mission, although he didn't write it, and Sweeney wrote War's End, And it's a fairly candid assessment of his mission. Tibbetts and Sweeney disagree on a few things, you know, when you read both of them, but particularly interesting hearing Doolittle's speech with him. So the 509th didn't stay in theater very long. It was returned to the States, but it still had a nuclear mission. They went to Roswell Air Force Base. Roswell Air Force Base, which by that was later called Walker Air Force Base. And just a little aside, Brigadier General Kenneth Walker was a New Mexico native who would have been court-martialed if he hadn't been shot down, because he'd been told, I don't want you, General, flying on combat missions. And he did anyway. And MacArthur had decided to court-martial him, but when he was shot down, he instead put him in for the Medal of Honor. So, as we say, it's a small thing. If you're interested in flying on a B-29, I don't have one, but the Commemorative Air Force has Fifi, which we've been flying for some years. The Friends of Doc finally have their airplane flying. Both of them, interestingly, were recovered from a Navy base in California, where both of them were targets for Navy pilots to shoot at. Thank God they couldn't hit anything. Anyway, and there they are. Fifi flies regularly with passengers. Doc has just recently started flying. Notice how brightly shiny. You know, Boeing put a lot of money into that airplane. And if you're really interested in a cool museum that isn't mine, you can go to the Nuclear Museum. This used to be on the premises of Kirtland Air Force Base, where nobody could get to it because you didn't have the pass. It's moved just off base, and you can actually go to a restaurant across the way, and it's rather nice. And there you go. So all we can do is remember, and I thank you for your attention. And if you're interested in hearing this again, sign up for...
You say every mission you wear your hat. What's the hat? What does it say on the front? I can't read it.
Oh, thank you. My hat. It's a Mack truck hat. It's, you know, and so I had a big airplane. I like having a big airplane. A lot of people want to be a fighter pilot. I never did. The only thing that was disappointing about my career is the Air Force picked the KC-10 instead of the 747. And I had really wanted to fly the 747 as an Air Force tanker because I knew what they would do, since the 747 in civilian service grosses out at 885,000 pounds. I always wanted to fly a 1,000,000-pound airplane, and that's what the Air Force would have turned it into. But with no compromise of safety, of course, and that's things off, right? Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, we've got a couple of things. First of all, Charlie brought some goodies, and he's back there with babysitting the goodies. So please feel free to stick around and share the goodies with everybody. Anyhow, I would like to present to you Colonel James Evans for being an outstanding presenter of our military history, and we really do appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Cross town to do this, so thanks again. And I guess the goodies, and that's about it. Did you want to do anything?